Good day and welcome to the rest of Chapter 6. So this would be the lecture for Chapter 6, Part 2. And basically, if you look at the agenda real quick, we are going to be starting off with a warm-up on Zoom. We're going to be talking about some things that kind of set up the end of the revolution and this transition to now. We're then going to talk about the formation of the government at the state level. We will then have our first national government with the Articles of Confederation, and then we're going to move on to the Constitution. So it's a lot today. So there was not as big of a lecture for last time because the war stuff is not as tested, but this stuff's important. So let's begin. I'm going to cut that off before it gets me in trouble with the YouTube police. But if you know the band The Who, that was Pete Townsend and John Williams performing a version of "Won't Get Fooled Again." And so I kind of think of that as a theme for this part of the unit, because the American Revolution starts off with a fight, but is it a revolution? Is it a change until you get a new government that is different, okay, from the government that you had? Was it just a change? You know, you got one king, exchanged it for another king, or are we going to get something new and completely different? You know, do we want to get fooled again? Anyway, so, a little bit more. You want to fight, okay, for your rights too. So a little Beastie Boys in there. So I will have a soundtrack that has things on it. I'm not sure if the Pete Townsend one's on Spotify, but I will figure out something. Anyway, so what we have here is the creation of state constitutions. Now, one of the things that you have to realize is that even though the British have always said that they have a constitution, theirs isn't written. Okay, they don't put theirs down on paper. It's like the sum total of the stuff they've done before. That's their constitution. Well, the Americans go, what? We don't trust that. We want it down in writing. We like to know exactly what it is that people are allowed to do and not allowed to do. So the first written constitutions, okay, in the world, okay, actually happen at the state level. And essentially what happens is all the different colonies, okay, had charters. But the power or the entity that said what they, where they get their thing from was the king, okay? And here they are saying, no, we don't like the king anymore. We need to make sure that we have we have a new basis of government. And they decided that they're going to take their charters and replace them with constitutions. So now, this was kind of an understanding that went out during the Articles of Confederation, and I think of it almost like a homework assignment. Like at the Articles of Confederation, okay, everybody, go home, rewrite your charters, turn them into constitutions, and then you have these different attitudes in how this gets done. Some went, oh my God, this is an incredible opportunity, and they just ripped everything up and made things from scratch, okay? That would be places like Massachusetts, okay? Other states, you know, those other people that go, what's the bare minimum that I have to do? And so some states, like South Carolina, they basically kind of go in and cross out, you know, where it says king, okay, and they cross out where it says, you know, appointed by the king. And they put in like governor, they put in their state assemblies. But pretty much leave the structure very similar to what they already had. Anyway, um, essentially, many states just refurbish those old charters, like I was saying, but others, Massachusetts, they captured the democratic spirit of the era. They put in it things like bills of rights. They want to make sure that we know exactly what laws, how people are protected. We want to make sure that the government can't get into our houses. We want to make sure that our freedoms of press, speech, even religion are preserved. So many states put these bills of rights in their state constitutions. Others, when they started talking about what their legislators, like their state assemblies, state senates would look like, they often had annual elections. That's every year. Now think of it. Why would they be doing that? They don't trust anybody. They want to make sure that they are able to pull people out of office if they do anything that the people don't like. So we have an election every year just in case we're not liking it, so we don't have to wait around 2 years, 4 years, 6 years to get rid of some. They also oftentimes had very weak judicial systems, so they don't have judges who can just throw people in jail. They also have weak executives because that reminds them of the king or the king's governor or somebody who is just telling them what to do, and they want to make sure that it's a more collective voice. The other thing that you're going to see is kind of an attack on what I'm going to call East Coast centrism. Okay, most of the former colonies had capitals that were on the coast because everyone's looking at England, and the people in the back country were going, "Hey, where to? Hey!" And so what these states did to make these people shut up in the West is they sometimes move their capitals inland, okay, mainly west, but sometimes kind of in just deeper in the state, like Albany in New York. But they're basically trying to make sure that other people feel that their voices are heard, instead of it just being those people that in those port cities. So I mentioned a couple times how Massachusetts was was one of the states that really tried to capture the democratic spirit of the age, and they, instead of basically letting the state legislature create their constitution, they did this weird thing. They called for a constitutional convention. All right, go and we're going to bring people together to create our government. Okay. Secondly, we're going to say that the whatever they came up with had to be ratified or approved by the people. I mean, this is just like nuts that they were trusting the people so much. Now, as this convention began, there were a few people that were very heavily involved. One, John Adams had just come back from Europe, and essentially they say, "Okay, now you may help us write something." And as he's going off to this convention, his wife Abigail is going to say, you got to make sure that you don't only think of men. Okay, you want to make sure that women are considered as well. So she gives some suggestions. She says that there should be equal rights for married women, and that women should also not be barred from school. And so Massachusetts will be ahead of its time in basically giving women equal access to schooling. Now, the other thing that that Abigail Adams wanted, which was equal rights for married women, that did not happen. Anyway, this attitude will be out there for women, basically, that that how can men basically be against the despotism of the king when men act like despots toward women? Okay, and so so there was this proto women's rights feminist movement that existed way back even during this period of American history. Another somewhat radical thing that that happened in the state of Pennsylvania. What they're going to do is they're going to start looking at other big issues, like you had to have property to vote, okay? And they basically say, no, okay? If you pay taxes, okay, you need to vote. You're a stakeholder. You need to be part of this system. Not only that, you also have the right to hold office. So it's not just a bunch of rich people making laws for a bunch of rich people and then taxing the poor. So it was trying to give a bigger share of the voice to common folk. Well, the government that we are first going to create for the country. Now, you have to realize that we're barely a country. I mean, we declare independence in 1776, and we're in the middle of a war. And someone says, "Hey, we don't have a government," and so, oh, we got to create something. And so what they create is something known as the Articles of Confederation, okay? And we basically create it so we can go off to the French and say, look, we're somebody. We've got a government. See? Okay. But as far as governments go, it's weak. Okay. Like the subtitle for the Articles of Confederation, a firm league of friendship. A league? I mean, this is the very first American league. It's a league, not a country. It really did not give very much power to the central government, which we're going to find out is going to be very problematic as time goes on. They did have one thing that they did well, and it kind of goes to really the one thing they had any sort of power over. You see, in order to get this ratified, there were a whole bunch of states that had land in the West. And essentially the states that were more landlocked, that didn't have, claims to Western lands, they weren't, this is not fair. How come some colonies or states could claim land all the way like across the entire America and then, Rhode Island. And so they wanted to try and have some equity. And so what they do is many of the states that had these Western landholdings just voluntarily give it up, okay? They cede their land to the central government for the central government to deal with. So one of the only things that we're gonna actually have that might be successful as far as the Articles of Confederation is something they actually had control over, which was these Western lands. So they passed two major land ordinances, and these laws, by the way, will be, when we get another form of government later, they will repass them. So essentially, these will live on after the Confederation period. Anyway, the first was known as the Land Ordinance of 1785. And it basically dealt with they called it the Old Northwest. You might call it the Midwest today. Okay, it's those states like Minnesota, Wisconsin. Okay, and basically what these areas were going to do was they were going to come up with how land can be sold. And so what they basically said is we want to make sure that all the land is surveyed. So if you've ever flown over the Midwest, you might notice something that's kind of weird about it. It's like looking down at a checkerboard. Everything is in squares, and that dates back to this time where they decided everything's going to be surveyed, and then all the land will be divided up and sold in these little square patterns, and you can just basically see it's the grid or graph papering of Middle America. The land would then be sold to help pay off debts that were starting to accumulate in this new government because they had no other way of making money. So this was really kind of a cool idea. The other thing they also put into this law was this little thing for public schools. And they basically had a section where when they sold off the land in that section, that money would support public schools. And so we already are getting this thing saying that public education, education that's available for all as opposed to a few, was already being held as important. A second land law was known as the Northwest Ordinance. And what the Northwest Ordinance did is like, okay, so there's now people living in these places, but they're not part of any state. So how do you become a state? And so they essentially set up the mechanism that for how a territory becomes a state. And there was one thing that I think is kind of cool is they gave that once a state is created, that state is going to have the same powers and whatnot as every other state. They didn't give these states they didn't give like the first 13 states super state status where they would have more than everybody else. That once these other states enter, they would be the same. And so, in fact, really, the only real big difference between the first 13 and the other 37 is basically that the first 13 have both a star and a stripe, whereas the latter 37 just get a star. Anyway, so their system territory reaches 60,000. It can apply for statehood. The other thing that was kind of interesting in this one, which is also kind of forward-thinking, just like in that last land law, is there had been on the books this proposal that these Western lands should not have slavery. And so now this applies only to the Northwest. So this is the northern territories, but they basically preordain that there cannot be slavery in these places. Now this is kind of important because it does give the central government, okay, first it had been the Confederation government, but remember that later they will repass these laws. So it essentially gave the central government a say over whether or not an area had slavery or not before it entered statehood. So that could be an important story later. Well, I've always taught that when let's say you're talking about something, you should always say like the good things first. So those land laws, yay, go Articles of Confederation. But in reality, the articles are failures, okay? So if that was a good thing, land laws, what were the bad things? And so the first issue is money, okay? Money is going to be a problem. Secondly, trade, Okay. Now, one of the things that we had hoped for was that we'd get to trade with whomever we want, but trade's a two-way street, and what happens if someone doesn't want to trade with you? Third, rebellion. Now, we were born in rebellion, okay? We were created in rebellion, but one of the big issues we're going to have within our brand new country is, yep, rebellion. So these are going to be issues that are going to expose the great weakness that these that we're going to see in these in these Articles of Confederation. So first of all, money. Okay. So during the Confederation period, a guy by the name of Robert Morris, who was regarded to be the financier of the American Revolution, he created the Bank of North America, which essentially was supposed to stabilize our money supply. But in order to stabilize money, you need to, well, have money. And so he says, well, for the government, we need to bring in a tax to finance the government. It was going to be an import tax. And basically people go, wait, hey, stop, aren't we fighting over this issue of being taxed? No, we hate that bad, down with the taxes. So our new government doesn't have this ability to tax. So essentially, they don't have money, okay? Now you're going, what about the land? We're going to talk about why the land law thing doesn't pay dividends initially in a moment. But so this is basically going to make it so that we do not have the money to run our government. The view that we use, and again, I told you about these Western land laws, and essentially what we're going to claim is that even though the land in the West was land that was claimed by American Indian nations, the fact that Britain ceded that land to us essentially made us feel that we could do anything we want with it. So it essentially would nullify American Indian rights. So in this system, we're going to say, okay, we're not going to tax, we're going to use this land, but it turns out this land is not as available as we were thinking. And again, we'll get to that in a moment. So the second issue is foreign relations, okay, and maybe trade in there. And essentially, one of the things that happened after the Treaty of Paris of 1783 is the British say on paper that that they were leaving the old Northwest. They were ceding that land to America. The problem is they didn't leave. Okay, they still controlled a whole bunch of forts in the Northwest, and they were basically trading with American Indians. They were still acting as if that land was theirs. They argued that they were not going to leave until America made good on some of the things that we had claimed. One of the things we had claimed was that we were going to restore land back to the Loyalists, but the Americans said, well, no, the treaty says recommend, and we recommended, but the states wouldn't do it. Well, the British basically say, we'll recommend harder because we have an army in place. And guess what? America did not have. Remember, George Washington went home, okay? He's at home, tending mushmelons or something, and the army is gone. So the British are on American soil, trading with American Indians, and therefore we can't sell the land in the upper Northwest the way that we had thought in order to raise money. Well, there were other lands, now not necessarily covered by those land ordinances, but there is other lands more in the Southwest. Well, the problem with the Southwest is when we got our border thing with the British, that was a deal with the British. And the Spanish go, what? Nah, I'm not thinking that the border of Spain is or Florida is what you think it is. And so they claimed this huge swath of land that America thought was theirs. And we go, no, 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 little Florida. And they say, no, 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 giant Florida. And so basically what they are going to do is they are going to close the Mississippi because they controlled, you know, Nolans. And so they're going to close the Mississippi and say, okay, you can't use this river. If you can't use the river, you can't, the territory in that area is not as useful. So if you think about it, you have all this land to the west of the Appalachian Mountains and east of the Mississippi, but the part in the north is basically controlled by the British. The part in the south is being obstructed by these actions by the Spanish. So therefore, A, we can't sell it, B, we can't use it, and so C, we look horribly weak. Well, we then go, okay, well, how about our relationship with our friend, our buddy, France? Well, France is going, you know, we're kind of PO'd with you for going off and making a separate deal with the British and not getting us any territory or anything. We're a little, and besides, you owe us money. So let's pay up. Now remember, they've got this giant debt. You know, they're about to call together the Estates General, and so they're going, we need money and we need it now. And we're going, about that money. Yeah, see, we were intending on selling land, and then we'd have the money, and we go, can't, because Britain, yeah. Okay, and so essentially, the British go, the French go, well, if you don't have the money, then we're just not going to play with you. We're not going to trade with you. So, you know, we're not really trading with Britain because we're mad at them with armies. We're not really trading with Spain because we're mad at them about the Mississippi River. And now our friend, the French, they're not trading with us either. So here we are, this merchant nation, not really being able to be much of merchants at all. Well, another place we could have gone is maybe off to Italy or Greece, okay? That might be a place where we could have done some trade. That'd be really cool. The problem is that we had always had access to those markets because Britain's Navy protected us, but we don't got that. And so when we go off to try and trade with Italy and Greece, basically we enter the Mediterranean Sea, which is controlled by Avasti scurvy dogs, pirates, okay? The Barbary states, okay? Morocco, Algiers, okay? Tripoli. Okay, they control this area, and they basically practice kind of what we did at the end of the American Revolution. Which during at the end of the American Revolution, we had basically created this thing called a privateer that would attack British shipping. Okay, and that was one of the reasons why Britain gives us a deal. Well, this is what these countries do. They practice state-sponsored piracy. And so they are going to essentially say, pay us tribute or you can't trade. Well, the problem is government doesn't have the money to pay the tribute. And we also kind of don't want it. So basically we can't do any sort of trading really at all. So, I mean, just kind of look at it. I mean, here we are, again, this kind of supposed merchant nation, you know, wanting to make our money all on our own, and nobody's letting us play. And we don't have the ability to force the issue because our army went home, okay? We never really had much of a navy to begin with, so we're kind of done. Third problem was rebellion. And essentially what happens is that you're going to have states that are going to try and pay off their debts. okay? And one of the ways that states try and pay off debts, it happens, is they try and raise taxes. Now, on basically who this hits is, these Western farmers, many of whom had fought in the American Revolution, had during that time borrowed heavily to keep their farms going. So they had giant mortgages, and all of a sudden they got giant taxes, and essentially they could make this fabulous choice. They could pay their taxes, ignore their mortgages, and lose their farms, or they could pay their mortgages and ignore their taxes and have the government like seize their farms, so they could like lose their farms or lose their farms. And so basically they say no. And a group of these veterans, led by a guy by the name of Daniel Shays, okay, is going to, they're basically going to revolt. Okay, they're going to tar and feather the tax collectors just like the people did back at the time of the Stamp Act. And you can see the similarities, kind of a more faraway government was forcing them to pay taxes, so they rebel. And so this is a nasty, nasty thing. So the Confederation government says, hey, we need to help out places like Massachusetts. And they contact George Washington and they say, George Washington, can you help us out? And George Washington says, you don't have the power to ask me to help out. You can't have the money to pay an army. Get back to me when you get your act together. And so what happens in Massachusetts is they essentially hire mercenaries, a privately funded army, to crush this crush this rebellion. And so just think about it. So the people that are being killed and stopped during this rebellion were many of the people who had helped win the American Revolution. So it's just like, what? Okay. So it's so this is messy. And so one of George Washington's, right-hand people, Henry Knox the Ox, is essentially going to say, we can't continue this way. We need to have a stronger central government. So what I'd like you to do right now is describe the post-revolution United States through 1787. What are the two most important ideas, things that you think that people should ought to know? So there will be a question on Schoology here, so just write it down, okay? Answer it and answer it, all right? Here's a hint as to one I think it is. Money, 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 money. And hopefully that I didn't let too many notes go forward, or else again, YouTube police will get me. All right, sorry about that. Anyway, so it is in this weakened state that we see the rise of what we call a nationalist faction. Nationalist means more for the nation as opposed to maybe for the state. So some of the names you should ought to know: George Washington, Robert Morris, Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, John Adams. Okay, all these people are basically saying that we need to deal with this. And essentially the ideas that are most controlling for them is dealing with commerce and trade, dealing with rebellion, and dealing with debt. Okay. They are going to get the Confederation Congress to pass a resolution. And what the resolution is basically going to call for is that we need to revise the Articles of Confederation. And so they're going to have a meeting, okay? The meeting's going to be in Philadelphia in 1787, and you're all going, what? That famous Articles of Confederation Revision Convention of 1787? Okay. But obviously, we don't know it as the Articles of Confederation Revision Convention of 1787 because in Philadelphia, we are going to write the Constitution. So we get the Constitutional Convention, or the of 1787, or the Constitution of 1787. It is still our Constitution. So we are basically governed by this document that was written then. So essentially, 12 of the 13 states are going to send representatives. And basically, the one that says no is going to be Rhode Island. Essentially, Rhode Island was going with what was a provision in the Articles of Confederation that said you can't have a major change without everybody agreeing. And so they essentially just thought that they had this veto, that no matter what they come up with, Rhode Island's going to have to be asked, because according to the rules that we're playing by now, it's supposed to be unanimous to change the Articles of Confederation. And so so essentially it's assumed that they're going to get the last say. Well, coming to this meeting are going to be some real heavyweights as far as thinkers. And one of them is a guy by the name of James Madison, sometimes called James Madison, father of the Constitution, because he's going to show up at this meeting with a plan. Yeah, and this is, kind of a secret. If you were ever going to go to a meeting to decide something or discuss something, write up your plan first, and when you walk into to the meeting, hand it out. And essentially, what happens is that almost nobody else comes prepared ever. So the meeting will become about your plan. And so a lot of James Madison's ideas will be discussed here. One of the first things that they do at this meeting is they essentially make the idea that kind of Rhode Island was thinking, which is that they might have some sort of veto because it takes a unanimous thing to change anything in the Articles of Confederation. Well, they just decide to simply to scrap them. So they go, okay, no, we're starting over from scratch. And, you can imagine Rhode Island go, no, wait, we're not here. And so the rules that were in the Articles of Confederation no longer apply because we decided that we're no longer going to use those rules. And we're going to make a whole new set of rules. Have a nice day, Rhode Island. Anyway, so we start to create this whole new document, okay? Now, the plan that James Madison brought, he's from Virginia, so it becomes known as the Virginia Plan. He had Edmund Randolph be the guy to introduce it to the Congress. Virginia was one of the bigger states at that time, and so we sometimes call it the big state or large state plan. And it called for some things like a bicameral legislature, which was a change. The the current Congress was just one thing. They also were going to base representation on population. Now, the way that this had originally been is that everybody shows up and everyone's kind of treated equally. And, Virginians go, well, that's not fair because we have so many more people. We should have a little bit more say. And obviously, little states are going, what? Okay. The other thing that is proposed here is they want somebody large and in charge. They want a stronger executive branch, and eventually it even becomes, let's have one person who's like in charge. And people are like, okay, but these are some of the tenets of how do you get a stronger government. And so some of the ideas are in here are met with yay, others are, and certainly small states are going, well, population not so happy about that. So the small states kind of make a counteroffer. And what the counteroffer is going to be is what known as the New Jersey plan. It's submitted by a guy by the name of William Patterson, and it basically favors small states by having just one legislature where everybody is treated equally. Everyone has the same number of members, everyone has the same number of votes. Equality, okay. And and essentially it's kind of like this shouting match, based on population. No, equality, and they essentially are at an impasse, and people didn't feel like anything was going to happen at this meeting so long as this issue stood in the way. And so fortunately there was a 4th of July holiday, Benjamin Franklin and a couple other folks were able to kind of say, what could we possibly do? And the guy from Connecticut, okay, state where my brother currently lives, okay, the guy from Connecticut, guy by the name of Roger Sherman said, what? Let's do both. And everyone goes, what? Let's do both population and equal. And so here it is, we go with the bicameral or 2-house legislature. One is based on the small state model, the Senate. The other is based on the big state model, the House. And so that's why you see it today, where California has 35 representatives in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate we have 2. Okay, and like Wyoming has 1 person in the House, but 2 in the Senate. So it's supposed to be a little bit of something for everybody, but obviously this is a compromise based on what the situation was at the time. Okay. The next big issue that needed to be dealt with was, are we going to have this person who's large and in charge? And really, this is one of the other things that James Madison did to prepare, and that is as he got George Washington to come to this meeting. And George Washington was, even though he's part of the let's have a stronger central government club, he didn't want to look like he was reneging on the fact that he had left power at the end of the American Revolution, because he always goes, how would it look if I show up? So he kind of protests a little bit, but James Madison gets him there. He gets in the meeting and basically puts him as kind of the guy with the gavel, and essentially it was George Washington's presence and everybody kind of thinking, I could actually be okay with a strong person in charge if it's true. Okay, and that's what kind of gets this thing through. But how do you pick them? And so you have this strong executive, but can we have like this giant election where everybody gets to vote? Oh my God, how could we do such a thing? How could we allow the popular will of the people to happen? You could end up with some strongman. You could end up with somebody who just kind of curries favor. And "Ooh, we can't let the people choose." One guy at the Congress is quoted saying that to allow the people to choose would be like asking a blind man to choose colors. This is what they thought of democracy at the time. And so they came up with this, I think, now convoluted system known as the Electoral College. On And so what would it be is it would be done, the president would be elected indirectly. And so each state could decide how to choose electors for the president. Now, some of the states were early on the let people vote, and people vote for electors. Others, like South Carolina, hold on to having their state legislature choose these electors for the longest time. And basically, what will happen is that the state would choose the electors. The electors would then have two ballots, okay, that were equal in weight. And the rule that they had to follow is that at least one of their two ballots had to be for someone who lived outside their state. Now, it was imagined that given the lack of kind of national unity at the time, that nobody would get the required majority in the Electoral College to be elected president of the United States. And they basically thought that this would serve more like a nomination convention. And the top three, which was the rule at the time, those names would go to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives would then choose, okay, who would be the president. The other thing that the Electoral College did is it said that the person who had the most was president, and they had to have the majority to get elected president. The person who was second most would be vice president. And so this could create problems later, let's say. The third issues that were starting to emerge had to do with North versus South. And so it has something to do with slavery. It also has something to do with commerce. It has something to do with population. And so what will end up happening is we're going to have to make a whole bunch of deals in North-South issues in order for this convention really to come to its conclusion. And so the first was, do you count people that are enslaved? People that are enslaved. I mean, so if you're counting up the number of people in the state and you're trying to determine representation, okay, do you count people who were enslaved? And so people in the North said, what? You can't do that. It's not as if those representatives are representing those people that were enslaved. And so they said, no, don't count them. And Southern states go, what? They're there. Okay, we count children, we count women, okay? We should count people who are enslaved. And essentially what they're describing there is all these other groups, women and children, they didn't have kind of rights to vote and representation and things like that. So and those people were to be counted, so count enslaved people too. Well, the North still went, so you're going to get more power based on how many people you've enslaved? That sounds crazy. So they essentially came up with something that is absolutely arbitrary. They decided to count people who were enslaved as 3/5 of a citizen. And so when you were trying to come up with your apportionment of the number of representatives you would have, and perhaps some sort of apportionment maybe for taxation, this 3/5 rule would be put into place. Second thing that was kind of a North-South divide was that going back to kind of what Robert Morris had wanted back during the Articles of Confederation, they wanted an import tariff. They thought that taxing imports was a way to raise revenue for the central government. It's, you've got to get the money from somewhere, particularly if we're having the issues with Western lands. And so so as they're arguing over this thing, you put a tax on things that are imported. All of a sudden, Southern states, what? Wait. Does that mean that you could put a huge tariff on on slave imports? And couldn't you put that tax so high that you could essentially stop it? And so Southern states are, no, we're not having any part of this. And so finally someone says, well, fine, what if we swear that for 20 years we won't do anything that will deal with the slave trade, tax banning any of it for 20 years? What do you think? And they go, okay, but we want something more, okay? What they also asked for was a way of getting property, read slaves back. People who were enslaved that ran away, and they left one like state and went into another state. They wanted to have a clause in our Constitution, okay, in our Constitution, that these people would be returned, that property would be returned. And so so here, essentially written into this, this document that was a rule book to start off our government, it essentially is saying that it has these little roots that this was a slaveholding nation. Now, they were very careful with the language. They tried to make sure that the word slavery itself doesn't show up, but they are governing slavery. And this will be like later there will be a anti-slavery radical by the name of William Lloyd Garrison, who will literally burn the Constitution of the United States because it had these blessings for slavery in it. But that's how they got this thing done. Well, if you kind of look at this document, okay, you're going to find that I apologize. You're going to find that there were a number of things that were almost like a pushback of the radicalness of the American Revolution. For one, it's going to call for a stronger central government. So that's more like what you had with the king, but at least we're going to put checks and balances so nobody gets too much power. They weren't really for universal manhood suffrage. They didn't really want people to have that much of a say. They put Supreme Court judges on for life so that they were not influenced by the politics of the day, the votes of the day, the feelings of the day. They elect the president indirectly. Okay. The only case where the people show up in the document that starts with "We the People" is that citizens could vote for the House of Representatives. Now, again, they still, the definition for citizens, which was, white males, but that's really the only place where people show up. So, having this document in place, we essentially set up a huge argument. The first big real argument within the United States, and that is whether or not, okay, we made this set of rules. We made the Constitution of the United States. Are we going to make it our thing? And so they put in there the same thing that Massachusetts had done. They were going to have ratification conventions where people come together to kind of vote on, let the people decide. But it essentially was 9 of the 13 say, we're in. So the people that were against us going this way they became known as the anti-federalists. Okay, obviously they didn't get to pick. And essentially what their argument was is that it would essentially recreate British rule. It's going to bring back higher taxes. Who wants this stuff? They also said it has no protection for rights. Where many states had created bills of rights, we had neglected to do so when we created this document. Now, some people at the end of the convention say, "Hey, we can do it in a day," but so much work had gone into just getting the outline that they thought that it would kill it to go back to the drawing board to put this in. So it wasn't there. There was also a reference to a standing army. Why do we need one? That sounds so British, having troops among us. It doesn't have anything about God. Okay, so it was missing a religious element that a lot of people felt that had been one of the bases for the creation of these colonies to begin with. They also said that it only took 9 states to ratify. Hey, the Articles of Confederation said that changes had to be unanimous, and Rhode Island's going, wait, no, you can't do this. It's everybody. And so people feel like, how can you get rid of something that took everybody with something that only takes 9? Right? The biggest battleground places turned out to be New York and Virginia. See, like 9 states actually did it very quickly, but that didn't include New York and Virginia. And could you really make a new country if these 2 big population centers were not on board? And so in these battleground states, you're going to see kind of a back and forth of letters and broadsides and newspaper articles, pamphlets, basically saying which way are you going to vote. On the anti-federalist side, one of the big voices was Governor Clinton from New York, who wrote a series of letters that he called Letters from a Federal Farmer. He wasn't a farmer, but he's gonna play it that way. On the let's do this side, we call them the Federalists. They probably got to pick the name. The Federalists are going to put together the argument in favor of ratification. They actually 3 people who were in favor. A guy that we're going to talk about a little bit more next time, Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. Okay. James Madison and John Jay are going to put together a set of papers, and it's Federalist Papers, essentially arguing we got to do this. One of their big arguments was that it's possible to extend a Republican form of government over a large territory. It actually works really well. They also argued that this was a better way to protect minority rights. Madison is then going to make a promise within the state of Virginia that if Virginia votes for it, he will make it his mission, he will make it his job to make sure that a Bill of Rights is added ASAP. And that was really that was enough to get it passed in Virginia. Finally, the vote is taken, Virginia goes, and then New York votes for it barely, okay? And the Constitution becomes the law of the land. So we are done now, and so what I would like you to do is look at the agenda, follow the steps that I have there for you, and I will see you back next week for Chapter 7.